Well, hey, everybody. We are here with Jeff from Utah to continue our viewer question and answer series. So, what part of Utah are you in?
I am in Salt Lake City towards the University of Utah area of the city.
Okay, so in the main area that I think everyone knows about in Utah is near Salt Lake City. I've heard Salt Lake City is super fun. And
It
that,
is it is it is a very fun town, and also the balance of Utah is very beautiful. We have the Red Rock parks at
Mhm.
the south. We have the Wasatch Cache National Forest to the east, where we have lots of great hiking and great skiing, and so there's a lot of great landscapes to Utah and a lot of great areas and history in Salt Lake City itself. So it's a great place to be.
That's fun. It's like you work for the tourism board or something.
No, I do like to promote my city. Some people hate where they live and they can't wait to leave. And it's like, why you got to find something nice about it, and you got to
Yeah,
enjoy
that's
where you are.
awesome. That's awesome. Well, what is your first question for me today?
So my first question revolves around the in-home removal process. So
Okay.
a person has died peacefully at home. The paramedics have come out. They've deemed there is no foul play. So when you go to someone's home to do a removal, what sort of dialogue are you having with the family? Do you keep your dialogue to a minimum? Do you try to be pleasant? Do you take inventory of what the decedent is wearing, such as, is this person wearing a nightgown
Hmm.
and briefs and an undershirt or a brassiere? Do you need to inventory all of that? Do you offer the family to remove any jewelry for liability purposes? Do you always use a decedent bag just in case fluids, to prevent them from spilling on the carpet, because no one wants that kind of stain on their carpet to
Right.
remind them? And then what, from other than from home or a medical facility, where would you pick up bodies? For example, at a crime scene or a work site location. So all of these are just kind of like, what is your process for an
Woo,
in-home removal?
chef. All right. Well, it's gonna vary really for every funeral home. Everyone's going to have their own methodology to all of that. Some funeral homes are going to only be using a pouch style cot where basically the cover comes up and around and then you zip down the middle. Others will use a cot cover where the person lays right on the cot and they'll maybe have a sheet over them and then you place the cot cover over them. So some funeral homes leave the face uncovered depending location. Some always will cover the face when you exit. So some of those things are really going to depend on funeral home. Um, I've never heard, or I don't know anybody that inventories things at the house. Typically, when you get back to the funeral home, you would maybe inventory what you take off, especially jewelry, and kind of catalog it there. I would go, so kind of what I like to do. I would arrive to the house with a two-man woman team. I would go into the house first with the other person if they want to go without bringing anything in, just to go in and kind of check out what we're doing, where we're at, what's going on. So I would go in, I would introduce myself. Some funeral homes will have maybe a packet of information that they bring at that time, and they have a price list, an information sheet, business card, kind of like an initial, here's information to look over before you come in for your arrangement, or here's something to bring with you for your arrangement. And they have a checklist like social security number, clothing, insurance paperwork, cemetery paperwork. So it may just be some things to help the family when they come to make arrangements, kind of give them things to bring. So I may go in and just kind of introduce myself to who's there, kind of get the layout of the land, see what's going on, see if hospice or the medical examiner investigator, see who's there, depending on the situation. I'll say, can you show me to where mom is, or whoever, and have them take me to where the individual is, whatever bedroom, bathroom, basement, wherever they may be, just so I can see where they're at, to see what we may need to bring from the vehicle for bringing them back into our care, because we may need like the roll up cot stretcher. We may need something more than just our cot. So kind of just go from there. I'll set up, situationally, I set up a arrangement time so that the family knows when to come in. If depending on the funeral home again, if I'm at liberty to do that, then I'll set up the arrangement time so they know when they're going to be coming in and making arrangements. I've gone on removals and darn near make the whole arrangement at that moment because they're like, well, why don't we sit down and talk for a while? And they're ready to go and they want to get everything out, and they may have like everything written down and obituary started, and you leave with all this information. So that way the only thing they're coming in to do is proofreading, you retyping things and signing contracts and situation like that. So it's a pretty broad range of what may happen. We then kind of go in with it looks like a hospital cot, depending. Sometimes they fold in half where you can drop an end. So we may, depending, I'm trying to think one of the last, we couldn't make it down the hallway and turn into the bedroom because it was just too narrow. So we actually brought the individual out to the hallway, just wrapped in a sheet, kind of like a hammock style, where we had 4 people and just carried them to the hallway and put them on the cot. So some of that kind of stuff, you just have to maneuver and figure. It's kind of like a Tetris game sometimes. Like if I go this way and do this, then how many people am I going to need to do this maneuver? And sometimes the family wants to help, sometimes they don't. If they look like they're on the fence, I always ask and they can tell me no. But sometimes people just want to help, or they want you out of the way so they can do it all. One of the last removals I went on, like the family was just like, just leave the cot. We'll bring them out to the car when we're ready on the cot. And I'm like, okay, I'll be outside. And they prayed and they sang and they did their thing. And then they brought them out to the vehicle on the cot, ready to go. So a lot of different, if there's wedding rings on, I don't ask unless it's maybe cremation. If I know it's cremation, I would ask. Otherwise, I would bring the wedding rings back with, because they've worn them for 50, 60 years sometimes. Why take them off now if they're going to be buried with them? I'll always ask if we're going to take a sheet, maybe they're wrapped up in a sheet. I would always ask, is it okay if we take this sheet and I can launder it and get it back to you? And sometimes they'll be like, oh, we don't want it. But sometimes just moving the individual, if they're on a sheet already, we might as well bring that sheet with us, as long as I'm going to give it back to the family. So some of that we play by ear is what the situation is. I don't worry too much about once they're on the cot, if they're going to purge or soil themselves or something. A lot of times they're in a diaper if it's a hospice situation, or adult, somebody yelled at me for calling it a diaper once, but it is a diaper. I'm sorry to say, but it's just an adult diaper. But that's going to catch anything that, leaves in that area. If you're rolling the person, you may get a little bit of purge. It's not often that it's like everywhere. If it's a situation that the individual is like decomposed and there is excessive leaking or excessive fluids, we would have a body bag usually that we would maybe then use a large body bag and place them in that bag and zip them up to move them, just to encase anything. But it's not often I would ever do that. Did I answer all of them? Oh, places I would do removals from. Some funeral homes contract with the coroner and with the medical examiner that they are the on-site removal team for them, even though the call may not be for your funeral home. So like for a county, they may contract a funeral home to just be the people that go do the removal, bring them back to the funeral home, and then the medical examiner or coroner will pick them up from there to go for an autopsy. Okay. So I did used to work for a funeral home that did that. And so we went everywhere, highway, car accidents, you name it, barns for hangings, everywhere. We would go and bring the people out of those situations, place them in the bag, and have them back at the funeral home for the medical examiner to come take to do the autopsy. If it's not that type of situation, then if it's someone going for an autopsy, the medical examiner has their own staff. So you don't actually go to the death scene. You would just get them from the medical examiner later. So, pretty traditionally, unless there's an autopsy, you're going to a home, a nursing home, a hospice facility. But even for like a drowning or something, if they're coming out of the lake, they're probably going for an autopsy. Car accident, they're probably going for an autopsy. Those are always a little more exciting because they're out of the ordinary. It's always fun to do something that's, I hate to say fun, but it's more interesting to be part of something that's out of your ordinary nursing home visit. Usually, it's just a little more interesting of a process, but we don't always do that because of the autopsy process. So, yeah.
Great. My next topic it revolves around you identifying as a freelance funeral director and what you actually do as that. So I have two possible scenarios here. So the first is, I imagine your trade embalming service consists of a funeral home requesting you perform the 2-hour task of preparing the decedent for viewing. The funeral home pays you a negotiated fee. Is that the process of a trade embalming? They contact you, can you do this? They pay you, and it's kind of that task is complete.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. That's
yeah,
exactly what I wanted.
I have a menu, essentially, you would call it, of services. So overseeing a graveside, making an arrangement, running a funeral that was up to so many hours, and then maybe an hourly price, or even body work where cosmetizing, or all these different things, signing a death certificate. There are funeral homes that maybe the funeral director is super busy and they just need some death certificates signed, and we can do them all remotely online, and so maybe they just need a death certificate signed. So what is my signature worth, I guess? And so it's this huge it's a menu of items that are for hire, I guess you would say.
And that's actually my third question, but we'll get there. So the second part of this is, you've mentioned that one of the tasks you perform is that of a freelance funeral director. I imagine something to the effect of a funeral home calling to say, quote, "Our staff is at capacity. Can you meet with this at-need client tomorrow?" And during the next 5 or so days, you meet with the family, present and order merchandise, schedule the viewing service, embalm, schedule the OC with the cemetery, and you're on site. So when you say freelance funeral director, is that the kind of thing you're coming in and doing? You're taking over the 5-day task of serving a client on behalf of a funeral home?
Usually it is a more segmented service where I'm just making arrangements and then getting everything lined up, and then that's it. And then leaving it. And then if they wanted to also say, hey, do you want to run the funeral? Do you want to do the graveside? Those are additionally, you would kind of have that on there. It is an interesting concept but you couldn't almost have, in terms of pricing, you wouldn't be able to price, okay, I'm going to follow this family, because you wouldn't know how many days, how much work, it might be a direct cremation family, so you wouldn't have multiple days of things, whereas a full traditional service, you would have multiple days. So in terms of pricing, it would be still piecemealed of choosing which things you wanted me to do, essentially. I would say majority is day coverage, that I'm going to work an office day and I can take calls for the evening if you need them, or just work the office, and that's like a set price for that type of a thing. And then, or you can just have me come in and do a funeral, or just come in and do, whichever.
Okay. So my third question kind of talks about that price list, and it touches. So I'm asking about how you set your compensation and how you do your accounting. So I'm not asking for earnings potential. I'm not
Right.
asking for your prices. So how do you set your fees? And when I ask that question, are you is there an industry standard or a community standard of what someone of your expertise can charge? Do you benchmark against other services, attorneys, IT technicians, that type of thing? How do you choose what you're going to charge?
Well, when I first started in this, I kind of came into a role behind a man that had a clientele, and he ended up having a stroke, and I ended up kind of taking over his clientele back in the day. And they basically said, this is what he makes, this is what his fees are. I looked at it to make sure it was, it worked in, and that's just kind of where it was. After I had done it for a few years, I increased my price because I knew my worth, essentially, in terms of what I could truly do. Not every funeral director can come in and do all of the printing, all of the video, the everything, because there's a lot of funeral directors who haven't worked on that side of it, who haven't done as much prep, who haven't done as much office, who haven't met with as many families, that maybe they've worked for a larger firm and they're compartmentalized. But I have knowledge in all the areas because I've worked so much in all the areas that I knew I brought a lot to the table with that. And so they, if it was a maybe husband-wife team that ran one little small place, and she was the office person and he was the funeral director, and they wanted to go on vacation together, I could come in and take over all of it. And that's what I did for several small firms. I looked at, though, hourly kind of area, what an average funeral director would make, and broke it down, as if that's your yearly salary, what is that per a 40-hour work week? So what would that look like for a, 8-hour, 9-hour work day, plus being on call and trying to make sure that it hit industry standards. But if you look at just look at trade embalming, what a trade embalmer makes in California versus Michigan, or, rural Iowa versus Chicago, or, it's very, very, very different. And you get into some unions in some areas and all sorts of different things. So there's not really across the board. It's one of those questions students ask a lot in some of the student groups, like, how much am I going to make as a blah, blah, blah? And it's like, well, where are you going to work? Is it large business, small business, corporate, private? Like, there's too many variables because it can be all over the place in terms of income. And are they giving you residence? Because there's, I think, like not a lot of businesses still could give a residence as one of your work perks, because there's a lot of residence above the funeral home. And so apprentices and young people coming out of college, they may move into an apartment that's at the funeral home still as part of their wage. Vehicles, phones, different things like that are work items that they give, which other industries have as well. But I think the residence is kind of unique still for the funeral business.
The last two I have here, or last topic, is how do you collect your fees? Do you issue weekly invoices? Do you use a manual accounting system, or do you use something like a third-party billing service or QuickBooks?
I use QuickBooks just for myself, and I just bill it. So, and it depends. If it's somebody who calls me only once in a while, then I'll bill them after each service. Some of them, if I work more routinely, I'll try and do biweekly, or I may forget and do tri-weekly, or, whenever Kari remembers kind of thing. But I try and do biweekly. So for those.
Okay. I have a bonus question if you'll allow me.
Of course.
Okay, so when you are aspirating a body, do you take the approach of once you go in at the belly button, do you follow a pattern of maybe 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, or are you going at specific organs? And how many strokes are too many strokes?
Oh.
And when you're going into the pelvis, are you making any attempts to remove the liquid from the intestines?
So you go in the kind of visual, you go 2 inches over and 2 inches up from the belly button. So you're not at the belly button. You want to go up. So you're kind of up in the lung, kind of sternum, not sternum, but up in the stomach area a little bit more than you are down in the abdomen when you go over and up. And you always go up first. You want to complete your whole upper, because as soon as you go down, you hit the bacteria, the major bacteria. So you don't want to drag that bacteria back up to the top, because that bacteria is where the major decomposition is going to begin, and that's going to do the worst damage. And so you don't want to drag that up and around to all the areas of the body, even though hopefully the cavity fluid affects as much as it can. I will aspirate up as much as I can until it's clear. So there's trocars that have like a little window in the handle and you can see what comes through, or the tubing is clear and you can see, or you look at the aspirator where the water comes out, like a hydro aspirator where the water's spraying out, it'll spray everything you're pulling out, kind of sprays out. And so when you hit a pocket of blood or something, all of a sudden it's red, and you just let it sit there until it runs clear, and then you'll move it more. You want to break up as much as possible. So to me, there's never too many, what did you call it?
I think strokes.
Strokes. Great. Too many strokes. There's never too many. You want to get up into the throat area, because that's where a lot of fluid can collect in the throat. So you kind of hit the throat area and you can hear air pulling through the nose into the throat. That's a great sound, because you know that whole passage is clear once you hear that. If there's a gurgle, you got to get it out. There's something called a heart tap that people will do when they are injecting, where they will tap the heart, but while they're injecting, and to try to get the drainage out the heart that way rather than out the jugular. But if you miss, you can screw up your whole system. So not a lot of people do it, and you have to be really good at it. But when you're aspirating, when you move on to the aspirating part and you hit that heart first, you get a lot out that way. So you want to hit your biggest components, clear the throat, hit the heart area, but you can get all these pockets up in the shoulders and everywhere that there's just fluid built up, and you can just hit these pockets of fluid. If the person had pneumonia, or what we're seeing now like COVID, there's a buildup of fluid in the lungs. So you know when you hit that, it changes color. Like all these things change color as you're hitting them, and you can kind of see what's coming out and what you're getting. Once you reverse and go down into the abdomen, you definitely want to make as many puncture holes as possible, because there's so much solid in your intestines and in your colon and everywhere. You're not going to be able to suck out all that solid. You're going to get bits and pieces, but the more holes you make, the more access for the cavity fluid to get in there to do its work and to kind of try and neutralize what's going on. So I was taught, and what I do is try and hit what you can, get it into the hip bone, because that's going to be on, I'm trying to think of a visual. So you're poking and you're trying to hopefully get some of the intestine between the trocar and the hip bone, and then you drag. So you're trying, because just poking, let me try and think. Like if you were trying to poke a water balloon underwater, it's going to roll. It's going to roll away from a point. So it's kind of hard to really puncture through an intestine, because it's in this soft, mushy area where it's going to roll away. So taking the trocar and getting the intestine between the trocar and the hip bone, you can then drag it to the side a little bit and rip it open more than you can poke through it. That's how I was taught. Makes perfect sense. So it's kind of what I go with. I definitely want to get the bladder emptied, which is a big one. And so if when you, Monica Torres, the Cold Hands host, just had a little thing on this that it's so important. So if you aim in towards the pubic bone and then straight down, you land right in the bladder and yellow, and you'll get all of it right out. It's just a perfect, you aim and go right down and you hit it every time. So it's just knowing your landmarks. It's being able to visualize under the skin what you're doing and knowing what is where. So, and just pushing from the top, sometimes like slightly pushing on the abdomen a little and just working it around. You get as much as you can.
Okay.
So
excellent. Thank you. That's all amazing information. I try to picture. Is she putting her hand on her free hand on the chest when she's stroking? And so I'm trying to think logistically how you're
I do. It's control. I mean, it's control to place your hand on while you're in, as long as you have good control of the trocar, because otherwise it's, I don't know. And especially if the individual is very small, you know, like a 75-pound little lady, there's not much mass to her. The trocar may get a little stuck on the skin or something, and so it will move the body with it. So you can't pull out and kind of go in as easy. So if I place my hand on the individual, I'm kind of holding them in place while that's going in and out. Sometimes we'll put soap or like lotion, like the K-Line cream, which we would put on the face, put that just to create a lubricant. So as it goes into that little hole, it's not like a wet bathing suit, you know, it kind of just sticks as you're going through, if that makes any. My analogies, I don't know, to me they make sense, but hopefully to other people.
No, it makes perfect sense. So.
I do as well. It's the first things that pop in my mind is what I say. So I guess that works for people, but yeah, that's what I do.
Those are my questions. I want to
Awesome.
say thank you for sharing your knowledge to all of your audience. That's why I used the word expertise earlier. Is I see that's what you have based on what you're able to tell us so professionally. You've got some expertise, and I appreciate on behalf of everyone that watches your videos. Thank you for sharing your expertise.
Well, and what I don't know, I'm happy to learn more about and share. There's people who are far more skilled in, you know, a lot of the embalming and everything than I am because of, you know, volume and what they encounter and things. But, you know, learning and growing and passing the information on is what I think, you know, being able to do that and have the platform to do that is important as well. So I think that's awesome. Thank you.
My pleasure.
That humbles me a lot. It kind of embarrasses me still. I don't know how to take compliments still, but it's really nice. It's nice to connect with people who are watching and interested. So I appreciate it. So thanks to Jeff, and catch us on our next viewer question and answer video. If you are from a state that I have not done a video on, make sure you reach out if you're willing and able and want to ask me 3 questions. I'll see you guys on the next video. Bye.
Thank you.